I'm Tony Liddington, but lots of people know me as Uncle Taco. That's a clown name. I formed a Pierrot troupe in 1983 when I was an undergraduate. And we all took the first letter of our first name, and then we put Acco on the end so that we sounded a bit like an Italian acrobat troupe, but also it evaded the attentions of the DHSS at the time. Gacko's here today, and there was me as Taco, and Macco, and Sacco, and Dacco, and Paco, and Hacco, and so you go on. But the Pierrotters, so we were the last professional seaside Pierrot troupe, which is my speciality, which is popular entertainment forms, their heritage and contemporary application, which is kind of where I bump into welfare state. I mean, I'd read about them in the early 80s when I was an undergraduate, but I got involved with them in 1985, 86, around then. I wrote them a letter saying, please, could I come on one of your courses or projects? I'll camp and make sandwiches if I don't have to pay the fee. And they refused, the bastards. But I did eventually get to perform with them and direct them and work with them on a number of projects over about 5-year period. And then I had my own journey to go on at the time. But I was always brought in as somebody to work on the theatrical elements. I'm not a maker. Most designers will keep me well away from any elements of manufacture. But in terms of working with things, yeah, sharp things or painty things, things that are sticky, I'm all right perhaps with some frocks, you know, give me some frocks to play with and I'm okay. But on the whole, you know, if there was a show or theatricality, then I enjoyed that, and I was inspired by, you know, meeting Foxy. John Fox was quite an event for a young man, you know, in my mid-20s, and wanting to be in performance, but meeting somebody who could make you see the stars and the earth beneath your feet totally differently was magical and transforming. So he and I worked together on a variety of projects. Sometimes he just employed me, sometimes we worked together on things, but I certainly didn't have the legacy that some of the people here who've worked with him over 20 or 30 years. I probably worked with the company for 5, 6 or 7 years over a period of time as a freelancer. So I was running theatres and running my own companies, and then he used to come and see some of the things that I did, and he came and see my pantomimes. But like many people, the work that I did was influenced by the thinking and practice of a company that was welfare state, who had created in post-war Britain a new form of, whether it's called celebratory arts or participatory arts, but using popular art forms. John calls it vernacular arts now, which I think is a good term. But that idea of ordinary people in ordinary places providing extraordinary things, I think is really useful. He always says, eyes on stalks, not bums on seats. It's a good slogan. When it became Lantern House as an organisation, it cut its links with welfare state. There's a lot of quite troubled water around that period, and quite a lot of ill feeling, out of which all this Futures venture emerges from that. Today this weekend is, I think, part of the healing process of that wound. Welfare State was one of the companies that would employ me on an occasional basis as a freelancer. So whether I was running an opera house or running a puppet show, I would still work with them. And I work with Walk the Plank, so we're in Walk the Plank space here. And I used to do shows on there. I'd direct them or take the Pierrots on, or Gacko and I would do our double act on there, and we would meet people from Welfare State, the Welfare State artists. I lived with a Welfare State, or a woman who used to design with Welfare State for a long while. And so there is a whole family connection. John talks about family a lot, and in fact it's a term that I hear from the 70s. I worked a lot with Major Road, with Graham Devlin, which was the start of the small-scale touring theatre movement. He always talked about family as well. That idea of having a pool of people from whom you draw, who you trust, respect and enjoy, rather than this idea of kind of totally open auditions, or it's actually a collective of like-minded people. And I think that is quite important. A tribe is a term people use quite a lot, but other people call it a clique. So, you know, where one sits in relation to that, the conversations downstairs are all about diversity. Well, diversity where I live is not about colour, and it's about a lot of other things. And I think, you know, there is, one could say that the artists represented in Welfare State and a number of the organisations I've worked with have come from quite privileged backgrounds. But that doesn't mean that the work we produce isn't attempting to create a greater diversity and encourage new people to participate, or new marginalised groups to participate. As artists, that's the territory that has been most interesting for me as an artist, you know, since the artist, I call myself a showman, but, you know, for me, you know, the career structure of people working in the arts was decimated by Thatcher and Thatcherism, and we found new ways of embedding ourselves in the community sector. Many of us became social workers, or many people became teachers, or people went into community arts, working with people with different abilities. All of those things where people went into the woodwork, but they weren't called artists. And as the Community Arts Network and the TIE networks were destroyed systematically, and the national curriculum brought in to prevent children from being able to engage with artistic practice, and as health and safety legislation meant that some of the more dangerous practices or more exciting practices that we were engaged with were curtailed, that became difficult. I took a lot of my stuff onto the streets, so I found a freedom on performing in the streets. However, the streets are increasingly privatised and controlled. So that political inquiry, that subversive inquiry, for me has been about where I can apply ideas as a freelancer generally. Now it's ended up with me being partly in academia. So, you know, I got a doctorate in itinerant British performance, which means I could be called a doctor, Dr. Uncle, which makes me drunkle. Yeah, I mean, it's the inevitable concomitant, isn't it? I mean, Blair he always said that he was, or no, Thatcher said that Blair was her heir, which I think is very interesting because he continued her policies. And now we are simply seeing the advance of those statements, you know, there is no such thing as society or whatever. And the neoliberal agenda was forged at that time, and the social contract was broken. And I was politicised by a variety of things, but particularly the miners' strike as a young person was about a choice. It was about which side do you sit on. You know, is it about economics, or what does the word economic mean, and what does the word community mean? What does it mean when somebody is given triple wages to go and control a situation over which they have no knowledge? What does it mean when somebody's reasons for being for generations in a locality and in a community are dismantled before their very eyes with no support structure, and subsequently nothing to replace it other than a credit boom. So all that happens was people borrowed on their houses and then borrowed on their cards, and are now living in debt in an acquisitive society where the individual is king, queen, whatever you want to make it. So I find that hardly surprising, but then I also find it very hopeful, because in this moment of crisis that we are currently in, out of crisis comes change, and there have to be risks, and there are always dangers out of which there is the possibility of a new structure. I hope. If nothing else, I'll just shout about it. I don't think there's any great difference. I mean, obviously the territory, the platforms have changed. The intentions haven't, and not all of it is an art form that I can participate in. I found it really hard to understand that project. I found it very difficult to engage with, because I had to ask to have it explained to me in terms that I understood. It doesn't mean that it's irrelevant or not the sort of thing we should be funding, because we should be looking at the new ways in which ideas are exchanged. I get most excited when those are also part of a practical, personal, human exchange. The bits that's the stuff that I know most about, and there is a tendency for people to exist in a virtual world. I understand the potency and the power of it, but I also know that that organisation has been responsible for the training of individuals to disrupt poster sites on bus shelters or whatever, that that physical engagement, dressing up in the part of somebody who then is they call it hiding in plain sight, the idea of being dressed as a workman, doing something that you look like you're supposed to do, but actually doing something subversive in the process. That was a very tangible, real engagement with the world that we're all in, catching buses or whatever it might be. So this is, to my mind, is another element of that, and it might well be far more impactful. But I don't see it as any different from somebody working with a group of adults with learning difficulties who are making a political statement on the streets and being public and making a statement about it, or the Shake the Tape people that we gave some money to raise the issue of the way that sponsorship of the Tate Gallery seemed to corresponds with the imperialism of the last 250 years of British culture. So I think they're all connected. They all have different roots. I see our purpose as trying to ensure that where there are ideas that we can connect with and can give it some element of support, that we use the money to do that, and we use it as speedily as possible. There's a sense amongst some of the people downstairs talking now that we should be investing for the future or finding a way of it lasting longer. And I think most of us feel, no, actually there's nothing wrong with mushroom growth. Let's do something, make a splash and go. That's what Welfare State did. It wasn't of their choice, to be fair, but they did stop. Major Road did the same. They stopped, sold their assets and gave the money to a trust to spend. I think that's a very healthy way of looking at things. It's Welfare State always used to burn their props and set at the end. They never kept, they did have stores of useful items, big lumps of iron and beautiful stairways and wagons. But anything that was a prop, anything that was made out of withies and stuff, was burned. And that was inspiring. It meant, okay, what rises from the ashes? What's new? What can we make next? Rather than how can we reuse and recycle, we would use recycled things that had no subsequent use and then get rid of them and have the pleasure of destruction, which is something people don't think about. Burning down the Houses of Parliament is a fantastically powerful feeling, even though in one sense it could be regarded as negative. It isn't. Flames, explosions, destruction is exciting, and that's a very interesting tension. That celebration is a part of that. John's work with the whole funeral thing is really fascinating. It's the ending of things, the laying to rest, the ending, the dissolution. There's the excitement of creation. There's the moment of creation and birth and all those other metaphors that there could be with it. Then there is the life and the marriages and the tensions of the life and the build. There is the climax of the moment of performance or presentation or experience that a wider public has. And then its final demise. And I think that's a very interesting journey to go on. Futures Venture is part of that. Welfare State is part of that, and Futures Venture takes it somewhere else. But in a sense, Welfare State and Lantern House had to die for that to happen. And Lantern House really was a building rather than an organisation. Nobody really talks about Lantern House as a culture outside of Welfare State. There was a 3-year period, and Dennis is part of that, and so he's a really important person for you to talk to. He's an essential linchpin in the way that things moved. Or how they moved, but that period was one of demise, of ending. And when John, Welfare State, finished, and they decided not to continue with the dynasty, the family that had been left to, or who thought that they were going to be left to run it, they were denied that. For whatever reason, I don't know, I wasn't part of any of those decisions, but when they were denied that, that's where the bitterness, the water, that's where that bad blood exists. And Futures Venture was born out of that. And my role within Futures Venture, in part, has been to try to find a way of bridging that gap. And yesterday and today, I've witnessed some of that, and that's been very moving.